The pier was wet and gray at 0640, and a man I had never seen put his hand flat on my chest and pushed me back down the brow. I did not fall. I want to be clear about that because in the weeks after, the story got told a dozen ways, and in some of them, I fell, and I did not. I took the shove in the sternum, felt my heel find the lip of the brow behind me, and stopped. The sea bag on my shoulder swung and settled. My coffee, which I had carried from the gate in a paper cup, folded in my other hand and gave out down my wrist. That was the only casualty of the first 10 seconds. A paper cup. He was big. Chief's anchors on the collar of his working uniform, though I did not read them at first, because I was reading his face, and his face was certain. That is the thing I remember. Not the size of him, the certainty. A man who had decided, in the 2 seconds it took me to walk up out of the fog, exactly who I was and exactly how little I mattered. "You're at the wrong ship, sweetheart," he said. "This one's mine to run." Behind him, at the top of the brow, a line of sailors in the morning watch had stopped what they were doing to watch. I counted them later without meaning to. 8 young men and women in coveralls and ball caps, and a couple of them laughed, the short bark of a laugh that people give when they are not sure yet whether a thing is funny, but the biggest person present seems to think so. I had commanded that ship for 11 months. I had crossed that brow more than 1,000 times. I had never once been touched at my own quarterdeck. I set the ruined cup down on the deck of the brow, out of the way. I set my bag down next to it. I did these things slowly, because slow is what you do when a situation is deciding which way to go and you want to be the calm object in it. Then I straightened up and looked at him. "What's your name, Chief?" I asked. He smirked. He had a good smirk. It had probably served him for 20 years. "Nobody you'll ever outrank," he said. I have thought about that line more than any man should ever have the honor of my thinking about a thing he said. Because it was, in its way, a perfect sentence. It told me everything about him and nothing that was true. The people most certain of the pecking order I have found are the ones who understand it the least. They memorize the shape of it. They never learn the weight. Up at the top of the brow, past his shoulder, a young officer stepped out from the quarterdeck to see what was holding up his watch. He was a lieutenant junior grade, 25 years old, with a fresh haircut and a sound-powered phone talker's posture, and his name was Tobias Reyes, and I watched his face come around to me and stop. I watched it change. He already had the radio handset halfway to his mouth. It stayed there, halfway, while the rest of him went still. That is where the morning turned. Not with a shout, not with a scene. With a 25-year-old officer of the deck recognizing the woman his chief had just shoved and going very, very quiet. Let me take you back so it lands the way it landed on that pier. I had flown all night to be there. 2 weeks earlier, I had been sent ashore to sit on a fleet readiness board, one of those assemblies of commanders and captains and civilians in a windowless room where the future of ships is argued in slides. It was important work. It was also 2 weeks away from my ship, which for a commanding officer feels like 2 weeks with your hand held just off the tiller, close enough to grab it, not close enough to steer. The board ran long. The last session ended at 2100 on a Thursday, and there was a red-eye that would put me back at the base by 0500, and I took it. I did not change out of my civilian clothes. There was no time and no reason. I had a pair of dark travel trousers, a plain jacket, boots I could walk in, and a bag with 2 weeks of my life zipped inside it. I came off the plane, cleared the gate, and walked to the pier in the fog, because the morning quarters would form at 0700, and I wanted to be aboard before they did. I wanted the crew to muster and find their captain already home. That is a small thing. It is also the whole job. You are there before they need you, and you are there after they stop needing you, and in between you try to be worth the space you take up on the ship. So I was in a jacket and not in khakis when I came up the pier. No cover on my head because I had not planned to render or receive honors, only to walk quietly up the brow, return the salute of a watch that knew me, and go find coffee that was not made of paper and regret. The anchors on my collar were in my bag. The 3 wide stripes that would have told any sailor in the fleet exactly who I was were folded in a garment bag between a running shoe and a dop kit. I looked, I am sure, like a woman who was lost. a civilian who had wandered onto the wrong pier looking for a tour or a spouse or a delivery entrance. I had looked like that my whole career when I was out of the uniform and sometimes when I was in it. I had made a kind of peace with it. Not a warm peace, a working one. Here's what the chief could not have known, standing at the top of my brow with his clipboard and his certainty. He could not have known that the woman he was pushing had stood on the bridge of that destroyer through a typhoon off the first island chain and brought 280 souls through it without a scratch to a single one. He could not have known she had sat on the deck plates of the forward engine room at 0300 with a 19-year-old machinist's mate who had just lost his father back home, both of them not talking, because sometimes not talking beside someone is the entire duty. He could not have known she had signed the letters, the ones that go home when the news is bad. She had signed 4 in 11 months, and she remembered every name, and she would remember them at 90. He could not have known about the machinist's mate in the forward engine room. It was a Tuesday in the middle of a long stretch at sea, and the word had come by message that the young man's father had died back home, suddenly, with no warning and no chance to say a thing. There is nothing you can do for a sailor in that moment. You cannot fly him home from the middle of an ocean. You cannot give him back the phone call he did not make. All you can do is the one thing, which is not to leave him alone with it. So I went down into the heat and the noise of the engine room at 0300 in a ball cap and coveralls with no stripes showing. And I sat down on the deck plates next to a 19-year-old who was pretending to check a gauge so he would not have to look at anyone. And I did not say I understand, because I did not, and I did not say it will be all right, because I did not know that either. I just sat. For an hour, 2 people on the deck plates of a warship in the dark, not talking, while the engines turned over beneath us and carried us both through the night. When I stood up to go, he said, "Thank you, ma'am," and I said, "Your dad raised a fine sailor, and that was all, and it was enough, and it was the truest work I did, that whole deployment." That is the person the chief pushed, not a rank, a woman who had learned that the largest part of leading people is simply refusing to leave them alone in the worst hour of their lives. Let me tell you about the typhoon, because it is the shortest way to tell you who was standing on that brow. It came up on us in the first island chain in the autumn of the year before, faster than the models had promised, the way the bad ones always do. I had the ship in open water with a decision to make, and the decision was mine alone, because that is what command means. There is a kind of person who thinks command is about giving orders. It is not. It is about being the one the orders stop with. Everyone below you can pass the weight up. You are the ceiling. You are where the buck arrives and stays. I took her into the sea and not away from it, which is the harder and the safer road, because a ship rides a great sea better with her bow into it than with it on her beam. And I stood on that bridge for 19 hours while the wind came through the rigging in a sound I still hear sometimes in a quiet room. We took green water over the bow that shook the whole hull. A young quartermaster was sick into a bag and kept plodding anyway, and I told him that was the finest seamanship I had seen all night, and I meant it. We lost a life raft canister off the starboard side, and a radar went down and came back, and at 0400, at the worst of it, I gave the order to come left 20 degrees to take the next set of seas better, and the ship answered, and we came through. 280 souls, not one of them scratched. That is not a boast. It is the whole of the job. Stated plainly, you bring them home. You bring all of them home. The chief on the brow could not have known that. He could not have known any of it. He saw a jacket and a bag and a woman who did not look like his idea of a threat or an authority. And he did the math he had been doing his whole life, and he got it wrong. I did not blame him for the math. I have done that math myself on other people and been wrong, and it cost you nothing but a little humility to correct it. I blamed him, a little, for the hand. You can be wrong about a person without putting your hand on them. That part was his to own, and in time he would own it. But that morning, standing on the wet brow with my coffee running off my wrist, I was not thinking about blame. I was thinking, the way I have trained myself to think, about the smallest correct action. What is the least I can do here that is still true? Because I have learned that the size of your response is not the measure of your strength. Very often it is the measure of your fear. None of this was new. That is the part I want you to understand before we go back up the brow. The first time a person handed me a smaller life, I was 18, and I was standing in my mother's kitchen in a mill town in western Pennsylvania, holding a letter that said I had earned a Navy scholarship to college. My mother cried. My father, who worked a rolling mill and had steel dust worked so far into the creases of his hands that no soap on earth would lift it, put the letter down on the table very carefully, like it might tear, and did not say anything for a while. And a family friend who was over that evening, a kind woman, a good woman, read the letter over my mother's shoulder and smiled at me and said, "Oh, that's wonderful. You'll make a lovely nurse." I want to be fair to her. She meant it as a blessing. In the world she came from, a girl who did well and put on a uniform became a nurse. And that was a high and good thing to become, and she was handing me the best future she could picture. She could not picture the one I was walking toward, because no one had ever put it in front of her. She loved me and she shrank me in the same breath, and she never knew she had done the second thing. I did not correct her. I was 18 and I did not have the words yet. I only felt the size of the future in that letter get a little smaller in my hands, the way a balloon does when you carry it out of a warm room into a cold one. I have spent 25 years learning to carry the balloon out into the cold and not let it shrink. In 2007, I was a lieutenant junior grade on a frigate, standing my surface warfare qualification board. That board is the one that says you are a real ship driver, that you can be trusted with the deck and the lives on it. Mine was chaired by a commander who had, I was told later, a policy about the young women who came through his wardroom. The policy was that they would not pass on the first try. Not because they were not ready, because he did not like the look of the fleet that was coming, and he was going to slow it down with the only tool he had, which was the word no. He asked me questions for 3 hours. He asked me things that were not on any board, edge cases, poison scenarios, rules of the road, puzzles built to have no clean answer. I answered them. When I did not know, I said I did not know and told him how I would find out, which is the only correct answer to a thing you do not know. At the end of 3 hours, he sat back and looked at me for a long time. And I looked back at him, and I did not fill the silence, because I had already learned that the silence is a test too. He signed my letter. I do not think he wanted to. I think I had simply left him nothing to hang a no on, and he was, underneath the policy, an honest enough man that he would not sign a lie. I pinned my surface warfare officer device on my chest the next morning, the little gold ship and swords, and I have worn some version of it every day since. There was a chief on that frigate, an old boatswain's mate named Delgado, who taught me the deck in those years when a lieutenant had told him not to waste his time on me. I did not know about the instruction until much later. Delgado never mentioned it. He just showed up, day after day, and taught me line handling and ground tackle and the 1,000 small trades of the deck that no classroom teaches. And he did it because, he told me once, near the end, a good chief teaches the officer in front of him and lets the officer prove out or wash out on their own account, and it was not his job to do a lieutenant's guessing for him. Delgado is the reason I know a bosun's pipe when I hear one. Delgado is the reason that 30 years later, standing on my own brow in the fog, I understood exactly what boatswain's mate second-class Danko was about to be required to do, and why and how much it would cost her to do it in front of a chief who outranked her. I have tried to be a Delgado to someone every year of my career. I owed him that. I owe him still. I tell you about Delgado because I do not want you to think this is a story about chiefs being the villains. It is not. The chief is the backbone of the Navy. I have been carried on that backbone my whole life. The man on my brow was not a bad chief because he was a chief. He was a good chief, having the worst 2 seconds of his career, and the difference between those two things is the whole point of what came after. That is the wound, if you want to call it that. Not any one man, not the chief on the brow. It is the accumulation. It is a life spent as the exception people did not expect. Walking into rooms where the shape of you does not match the shape of the authority, and watching person after person do the fast, wrong math, and correcting it, and correcting it, and correcting it, until one day you get tired of correcting it, and you decide to let the work do the talking instead. I stopped correcting people somewhere around the rank of lieutenant commander. Not out of weakness, out of economy. It is expensive to argue with every stranger about who you are. It is cheaper and quieter, and in the end, more devastating, to simply be who you are until the room has no choice but to see it. The gate guards who waved me toward visitor parking, the vendors who handed me their clipboards to sign for a delivery, the junior officers from other commands who, at conferences, assumed I was the one who would take the coffee order. I had a system, I let them be wrong for exactly as long as it did not matter, and then I let the truth arrive on its own schedule. And I watched the wrongness fall off their faces, and I never once said, "I told you so," because I had not told them anything. That was the point. I had let the world tell them. I could give you 100 of them. The gate guard at a base I will not name, who, seeing my civilian car and my civilian clothes on a Saturday, directed me firmly to the visitor center and told me the exchange did not sell to the public, and I thanked him and parked and walked to my office. The contractor at a shipyard who handed me a hard hat and asked me to sign for a pallet of valves, and I signed for the valves, because the valves did need signing for, and I was, that day, the nearest hand. The lieutenant from another command at a joint conference, young and sure of himself, who set his empty cup down in front of me during a break and said, without looking up from his phone, "2 sugars." And I looked at that cup for a moment, and I thought about all the ways I could answer, and then I picked it up, and I filled it with 2 sugars, and I set it back down in front of him, and I said nothing, and I watched him figure out over the next 40 minutes as the session resumed and the roles became clear, and the woman he had sent for coffee turned out to be the commander leading the panel, exactly what he had done. He came to me afterward, gray in the face, to apologize. I told him the truth, which was that I had brought him the coffee because he had needed coffee, and that the lesson was free and that he should spend it well. I have wondered since whether he remembered. I hope he did. The free lessons are the ones that teach the most, if the person is honest enough to take them. I built that system over 25 years, and I want to be clear about what it is and what it is not. It is not weakness. It is not letting people walk on me. It is a decision made fresh each time that I will not spend my dignity trying to install itself in a stranger who is not asked to receive it. Dignity does not need to be argued into a room. It only needs to keep standing there until the room notices. The coffee arrives, the valves get signed, the truth catches up. And the person who is wrong is left holding the whole weight of their wrongness, alone, which is a far heavier thing than anything I could have said to them. So when a chief I had never met put his hand on my chest at my own brow, some part of me, the tired part, the honest part, thought, here we are again. Here's the fast wrong math, one more time in the last place on earth I would have expected it, at the top of my own gangway. And another part of me, the part that had been a captain for 11 months, thought something else. It thought, this one is going to arrive on its own schedule too. And I am going to let it. Back to the brow. Lieutenant Junior Grade Reyes came down 2 steps, which put him just above the chief and just below me, and he said, "Ma'am," and the word had a whole sentence folded inside it. Chief Voss, because that was his name, Chief Boatswain's Mate, Garrett Voss, reported aboard 11 days into my absence, laughed without turning around. "Relax, sir," he said. "I've got the pier. Some folks think a Navy base is a public park." "Chief," Reyes said, "Chief, stand down." There is a particular difficulty in what Reyes was doing, and I watched him do it in real time, and I have been proud of that young man ever since. He was a junior officer. Voss was a chief petty officer, senior enlisted, 20 years in, the backbone of the Navy, the exact person a smart lieutenant junior grade learns to lean on and trust and never ever correct in front of a watch section. Everything in Reyes's training told him to defer to the chief, and everything in his eyes told him that the chief was about to do a great deal more damage to himself than any lieutenant junior grade could ever do to him, and that the only decent thing, the only loyal thing, was to stop him before the truth stopped him harder. "Chief," he said a third time, and this time his voice did something. It dropped. It found the floor of itself. "Take your hand off the commander." The word went out into the fog. Commander. It did not reach Voss. That is the strange physics of a moment like that. The word was said, plainly, at a normal volume, 6 feet from the man, and it did not reach him because he had already decided what the morning was, and a single word was not going to change a decision that firm. He heard commander, and his brain filed it as part of whatever theater the young officer was performing to look important in front of the watch. Down the brow, at the quarterdeck, the boatswain's mate of the watch had come to the rail. Boatswain's mate. Second class Maricela Danco, 29 years old, 5'4", with a bosun's pipe on a lanyard around her neck and both hands wrapped around the top rail. She had been aboard my whole command. She knew my face in the dark. She knew my voice on the 1MC from 1,000 mornings of "Good morning, Ridgely." and she was looking at the two of us on the brow with an expression I can only describe as a person watching a wave. They cannot stop, already knowing the shape of the water. She knew what came next. She had the pipe in reach and the training in her hands, and she knew, to the second, what the quarterdeck was about to be required to do. I picked up my bag. I want you to notice that. I did not pull out my identification and brandish it. I did not announce myself. I picked up my sea bag, the ordinary way a person picks up their bag when they intend to walk somewhere, and I stepped forward to go up my own brow. Voss moved to block me again. He put his body across the brow, the way you would block a stranger, and this time there was less certainty in it and more something else. Not fear yet. The first cold draft that comes in under the door before you know the door is open. You wait right there, he said. You don't come aboard my ship without I clear you. Chief, I said. My voice was level. I have a voice I use on a bridge in bad weather, and it is not loud, and it is very clear, and it does not leave room. I used a smaller version of it. I'm going to ask you one time to step aside. Or what? He said. Before I answer that, let me tell you what he did in the 2 seconds after, because it is the exact machinery of how a person defends a mistake. He demanded my identification. He put out his hand, palm up, the way you would to a trespasser, and he told me that no one came aboard his ship without he cleared them, and that if I could not produce a military identification card, I could wait on the pier, like everyone else, until he decided what I was. He got louder as he said it. That is the tell. A person who is right does not need volume. Volume is what we reach for when the ground under an argument starts to move, and we are trying to stamp it flat again with our own noise. I reached into my jacket, slowly, because you move slowly when a large, certain man has already put his hands on you once. And I took out my identification card, and I held it out flat, photo up, the way you hand a thing to a person you do not fully trust to take it gently. It is a small green card. It has my photograph, and it has my name, Coyle, Nadia, and it has, printed plainly where anyone could read it, the word Commander, and beneath that, United States Navy. And beneath that, the name of the ship, my ship, the one he was standing on. He looked at it. I watched his eyes go across it, once, fast, the way a person reads a thing they have already decided is a trick. And here's the part I want you to sit with, because it is the most human thing in the whole story. He did not believe it. Not in that first second. His certainty was so complete that when the truth was placed flat in his open hand, in official ink, his first instinct was not to accept it, but to suspect it. A fake. A prop. Some game the young officer was in on. That is how hard a person will hold a mistake once they have decided to hold it. Harder than they will ever hold the truth. The watch section behind him had gone quiet in a different way now. The laughing was long over. Reyes stood one step up, caught in the oldest bad position in the service, a junior officer who can see a senior enlisted man walking off a cliff and knows that reaching for him and letting him fall will both be held against him, somehow, someday, and choosing any way to reach. I could have ended it right there. Card in his hand, 3 witnesses who already knew. One sentence in my bridge voice and it would have been over. I chose the smallest, cleanest version instead. I have told you why. Let me show you. Here is what I have learned about the sentence, or what. It is never a question. It is a door a person opens because they are certain of the room behind it. They say, or what, because they cannot imagine the answer being anything they need to fear. And 9 times out of 10, in the small collisions of ordinary life, they are right, because most of us do not carry an or what worth the asking. But it is a terrible thing to say to the wrong person, because the wrong person does not have to shout the answer. The wrong person only has to let the world answer for them. I did not answer him. That was the decision, made in about half a second, and it was the whole hinge of the morning, and I have never regretted it. I could have answered him. I could have said, "This is my ship, Chief. My name is on the quarterdeck plaque. You walked past your first morning aboard. And in about 10 seconds, every man and woman on this pier is going to be at attention, and you are going to be the only one who understands why too late." I could have unzipped the bag and pulled out the collar devices and held 3 stripes up in front of his face. I could have taken the young officer's radio and put out a call that would have brought the command duty officer down the brow at a run. Any of those would have been a scene. And a scene is what he had made. And I have watched enough people meet contempt with contempt to know exactly where that road goes. It goes to two people yelling on a pier, and a watch section that will remember their captain as the woman who screamed back, and a chief who will spend the rest of his career telling the story as the day the CO lost her temper, editing out his own hand on her chest until even he believes the edit. I did not want the win that way. I wanted the truth, cleanly, at the smallest possible size, doing exactly what the truth does when you let it. So I looked past him, up to the young officer on the ladder. "Officer of the deck," I said. "I'm coming aboard. Carry on with the watch." And I saw the chief's face begin, finally, to move. Because carry on with the watch is not a thing a lost civilian says. It is not a thing a spouse says, or a vendor, or a tourist. It is an order, and it is given in the grammar of the quarterdeck, and it fit my mouth the way a key fits the one lock it was cut for. He heard it land in the young officer, saw Reyes straighten and answer, "Aye, ma'am," before he could think better of it, saw the boatswain's mate of the watch lift the pipe off her chest, and the cold draft under the door became the door swinging open. He looked at my collar, where there were no anchors and no stripes, only the plain seam of a travel jacket. And then, because some animal part of him had finally caught up to the room, he looked at my face, really looked at it, the way Reyes had looked at it, and I watched him try to place it, and I watched him fail, and I watched him understand that the failure was the answer. Reyes came the rest of the way down and stopped one step above the chief. He did not touch him. He simply arrived at the young officer's full and quiet height, and he said, "Chief Voss, step aside, now." And Voss, at last, stepped aside. I picked up the bag, I stepped onto the brow, and I turned, out of a habit 30 years deep, toward the stern of the ship, where the national ensign hung wet and heavy in the still air. And I brought my hand up and held the salute to my colors. Boatswain's mate, second-class Danko, brought the pipe to her lips. If you have never heard a bosun's pipe, it is a small silver thing, older than steam, older than steel, and it makes a sound that cuts through wind and engines and 80 years of a person's life and finds the part of them that stands up straight. She sounded the side, the long, rising, falling call that the Navy has used to mark the coming and going of important persons since there were sides to pipe over. Then she keyed the 1MC, the ship's announcing system, the one whose speakers hang on the masts and the pier stanchions and reach every corner of the ship and a good stretch of the waterfront, and into it, in a voice that did not shake, she said 2 words. "Ridgely, arriving." 2 words. That is all it takes to move a pier. Because that honor, the ship's own name followed by the word, arriving, is not given to visitors. It is not given to admirals or senators or the president. Distinguished visitors are announced by their titles. The ship's name itself, spoken as an arrival, is reserved for one single human being on the face of the earth, the commanding officer. When the 1MC says the name of the ship is arriving, it is saying the ship's captain has come home. It is the ship announcing itself through the person who is, in the old and total language of the sea, the ship made flesh. I heard it go out across the water, and I heard the pier answer. It answered the way a field of grain answers a wind. Attention rippled outward from the brow in every direction at once. The 8 sailors of the watch section, the ones who had laughed, came to attention so fast and so hard that I heard boot heels strike the deck. On the fantail aft, a working party paused with a mooring line in their hands and came upright. Down the pier, at the base of the big crane, a knot of shipyard workers and sailors turned as one toward the sound, and the nearer ones squared away. A chief walking a dog on the far side of the pier, off duty, in civilian clothes like me, stopped and faced the ship. 200 people, more, all turned in the space of a breath, toward the woman a chief had shoved off her own brow 90 seconds before. And Chief Voss, standing at the top of the brow, took his hand the rest of the way off my bag, which he had reached for again, without knowing he had done it, and let it fall to his side, and stood there, while the color went out of his face like water going out of a sink. There was no gloating in me. I want to be truthful about that, because it would be a better story, maybe, if there had been, if I had felt a hot rush of victory. I did not. What I felt was the enormous, quiet grief of the whole thing. that it takes 2 words on a loudspeaker to make a man see a person he had decided not to see, that the sound had to reach 200 people before it could reach the one who most needed it, that I had, once again, in the last place I would have chosen, had to become the rank before anyone would let me be the person. But under the grief, there was the other thing, the thing that is the reason I do this work at all. The Pier at attention was not at attention for me, Nadia Coyle, the woman from the mill town with the ruined paper cup. It was at attention for the office. For the idea that a ship has one captain, and the captain is due the side, and the honor, whoever they are, whatever the shape of them, however they walk up out of the fog. That is not vanity. That is the thing that holds a navy together in the dark. And I have given my life to it, and in that moment, on that gray morning, it held. I finished my salute to the colors. I turned to the officer of the deck. "I request permission to come aboard," I said. Reyes saluted. His hand was very steady. "Permission granted, ma'am," he said. "Welcome home." I stepped off the brow and onto the deck of my ship, and my boot found the non-skid the way it had 10,000 times. And behind me on the brow, for the first time all morning, Chief Voss was the one who was out of place. The command master chief was on the quarterdeck by the time I stepped aboard. That is how a good command master chief works. You do not send for them. The ship sends for them through some current that runs faster than a radio, and they arrive already knowing. Command Master Chief Yolanda Booth was 47 years old, 28 years in the Navy, and she had served with me twice before this ship. Once as a first-class petty officer when I was a division officer, once as a senior chief when I was a department head. We had known each other for more than half of my career. She had watched me be underestimated in a dozen wardrooms and a dozen piers, and she had a particular stillness she went into when she watched it happen, a stillness I had learned to read. She was in that stillness now. She took in the brow, the chief, the ruined cup, the bag on my shoulder, my civilian jacket, the watch section only just now easing out of attention, the young officer of the deck with his color high. She read it all in one slow sweep, the way she read everything, and then she looked at me, and the corner of her mouth moved about a millimeter, which for Master Chief Booth was a shout. "Ma'am," she said, "good to have you back." "Good to be back, Master Chief," I said. "You want your chief?" she asked. She did not say his name. She did not need to. There was a whole recommendation folded into the 3 words. She was telling me she would take him off my hands, that she would handle it in the mess, chief to chief, the way the chiefs handle their own, and that if I wanted it to disappear into that world, I never had to touch it again. It was a gift she was offering. It was also a test, though she would never have called it that, of what kind of captain I was going to be, about the worst thing a stranger had done to me in a year. "I'll see him," I said. "In my cabin, after quarters, have him bring nothing but himself." Booth held my eye for a second. Then she nodded, once, and I saw in the nod that I had answered the test the way she had hoped, though I only understood the shape of her hope later. Morning quarters formed on time. The ship does not stop for a captain's bad morning. I went below, changed at last into my uniform, put the anchors and the stripes where they belonged, and came up onto the flight deck aft where the crew was mustered. And I stood in front of 280 sailors as the woman they knew, and I said the ordinary things a captain says at quarters, the plan of the day, the schedule, the work ahead, and not one word about the brow. They knew. Of course they knew. It was already through the ship the way anything is through a ship by the time you have finished having it. But I did not spend it. I let it sit there, unspoken, in the space between us. And I have found that the things you decline to say from a position of strength are louder than anything you could shout. Chief Voss came to my cabin at 0900, and he came braced. I know brace when I see it. He came in expecting a keel hauling. He came in the way a man walks toward a thing he believes he has earned and dreads, with his jaw set and his eyes forward, and his whole body organized around absorbing a blow. He had spent the 2 hours since the brow, I would learn, telling exactly no one his side, which was to his credit, and rehearsing his own execution, which was human. I let him stand there for a moment, not to punish him, to let the room be quiet, because a quiet room does more honest work than a loud one. "Sit down, Chief," I said. He did not want to sit. Sitting felt, to him, like being let off, and he had not decided yet whether he wanted to be let off or whether he wanted the blow so he could stop dreading it. But an order is an order, and he sat on the edge of the chair, spine straight. "Tell me what happened at the Brow," I said. "Your version, all of it." "I was there, so this is not a test of your story. It is a test of whether you can tell the truth about yourself when the truth is not flattering. That is a thing I need to know about every chief on my ship." He was quiet for a second. Then, to his lasting credit, he told it straight. He did not soften the hand. He did not edit out the sweetheart or the nobody you'll ever outrank. He laid it out, flat and ugly, the way it had happened, and when he got to the part where the 1MC said the ship was arriving, his voice did catch, just once, and he pushed through it. "I put my hands on my commanding officer, ma'am," he said at the end. "On a woman I didn't know, at the top of the Brow, in front of the watch. There's no version of that I get to be proud of." "No," I said. "There isn't." I let that sit too. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Not the shove, the math. You looked at me and you decided something in about 2 seconds. I want to know what you decided and why, because you're going to spend the rest of your career deciding things about people in 2 seconds, and I need to know how your 2 seconds work." He looked at his hands. Big hands. Boatswain's mate hands, rope and paint, and 40 years of the trade folded into one man. "I saw somebody who didn't look like a threat and didn't look like brass," he said slowly. "Civilian clothes, a bag, no cover, coming up the Brow like she owned it. And I've had people wander onto piers before. Reporters, protesters, one time. A guy once who wanted to see the ship his dad served on. God rest him. But you can't just let a man aboard because he's got a story. So I saw the clothes in the bag and I made you into the problem I'd seen before, instead of looking at the one in front of me." It was, I thought, a genuinely good answer. It was self-aware in a way most people never manage. It named the exact machinery of the mistake, which is the only way anyone ever fixes the machinery. "And the word," I said. "Sweetheart, nobody you'll ever outrank. Where did those come from?" He was quiet longer this time. "Those didn't come from the pier, ma'am," he said finally. "Those came from me. I'd like to tell you they came from the situation, but they didn't. They came from me thinking I was talking to a woman I could talk to that way. I don't have a good thing to say about that. I've got a daughter. She's 15. If a man talked to her at a gate the way I talked to you at that Brow, I'd want to put him in the water. I did not put Chief Foss in the water. I want to tell you what I did instead, because it is the part of the story that matters most and gets told least, and because if you take one thing from a woman who spent 25 years being underestimated, I would rather it be this than the sound of a pier snapping to attention. I told him the truth of the day. I told him that he had done a genuinely serious thing, that putting hands on any person at the Brow was a matter I could not and would not simply wave away, that there would be a formal counseling and a record of it, and that the word of it was already through the ship and he would have to earn his way back from it with the mess and the crew by his own work, and that none of that was mine to soften. And then I told him the other truth. "You reported to my ship 11 days ago," I said. "You have not had one honest chance to be the chief you are capable of being here, because on day 11 you stepped in a hole so deep you can't see the top of it. I could leave you in the hole. Plenty of captains would, and they would be within their rights, and no one in the fleet would say a word against it. But I have been underestimated at more brows and gates and doors than you have years in the Navy, Chief, and I know something about holes. I know that the measure of a person is not whether they fall in one, it is what they climb out carrying." He was very still. "So here is what is going to happen," I said. "You are going to take the counseling and the record, and you are going to stand there and take it without one word of excuse, because you already told me the truth in this cabin, and I will not have you tell a lie to the paperwork. And then you are going to go back to the quarterdeck and to the deck division, and you are going to be a chief, a real one, the kind who looks at the person in front of him instead of the problem behind his eyes. And in a year, when some new sailor reports aboard and looks lost and doesn't fit somebody's idea of what belongs on a pier, you are going to be the one who walks down the Brow and says, 'Welcome aboard. Can I help you find your way?' Because you will know, better than any chief on this ship, exactly what the other thing costs." He stood. I had not told him to, but I let him, because I understood the need to be on his feet for what he said next. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady, which I respected more than steadiness. "I don't deserve that." "No," I said, "you don't. Almost nobody deserves a second chance. That's why they're worth so much. Dismissed, Chief." He came to attention. It was a different attention than the one on the brow. That one had been ordered out of him by 2 words on a loudspeaker. This one he built himself from the deck plates up, and I have thought many times since that the second kind is the only kind that lasts. He turned and went, and in the passageway outside my cabin, I would hear later from Booth. He stopped for a long moment under the command photograph on the bulkhead. My photograph. The one he had walked past his first morning aboard, and every morning since, without ever once reading the nameplate beneath it. He stood there, the Master Chief said, and looked at it. And then he squared his cover and went to muster his division. There is a world on a ship that a captain does not enter, and should not, and I have always respected its border. It is the chief's mess. The chiefs run it themselves by their own hard code, and what happens in it is theirs. Command Master Chief Booth went into that world after Voss left my cabin, and I do not know everything that was said in it, and I did not ask, because it was not mine to know. But I know the shape of it, because I know the mess. A chief who puts his hands on a person at the brow, who talks to a stranger the way Voss talked to me, does not answer only to his captain. He answers to the anchors on his own collar. The other chiefs will have made that clear in a language older and blunter than anything I could have used, and it will have cost him more, in the currency he actually values, than any counseling I could sign. Booth told me only one thing about it later over coffee. She said, "The mess has him, ma'am. He'll be all right or he won't, but it won't be because nobody told him the truth." And then she said the thing I have carried since. She said, "You gave him a door. The mess is going to make sure he's worth walking through it. That's the 2 halves of it. You can't do our half, and we can't do yours." And then there was the watch section. The 8 who laughed. I did not forget them, and I did not let them off, though what they had done was smaller and softer than what the chief had done. In the days after, through the ordinary channels, through their chief and their division officer, the word reached them, and I made sure of the shape of it. The word was not that they were in trouble. The word was that they had learned, cheaply, at no cost to their own careers, the single most expensive lesson in the whole service, that you never, ever know who is walking up the brow, and that the measure of a sailor is how they treat the person they have decided does not matter. They had laughed at a woman being shoved because a big man seemed to think it was funny. Every one of them, I would bet, will remember the sound the pier made when it snapped to for the rest of their lives, and will think twice, at the next brow, before they laugh at anyone. That is worth more than a mast. That is a lesson that sticks. I sat alone in my cabin for a while after he left. The bag I had carried all night was still on the deck by the door where I had set it down. My uniform was on at last, the anchors and the stripes back in their place, and I was the captain again in the eyes of any man or woman who might walk in. But for a few minutes, with the door shut and the gray light coming in through the porthole and the coffee I had finally gotten going cold at my elbow, I let myself be tired. Because it is tiring, I will not pretend to you that it is not. 25 years of walking into rooms as the exception. 25 years of the fast, wrong math done on my body before anyone bothered with my record. 25 years of choosing over and over the small correct action, the quiet arrival, the refusal to meet contempt with contempt when there is a part of every human being that just wants, once, to be seen the first time, without having to become a thunderclap on a loudspeaker to earn it. I thought about the woman in my mother's kitchen, 30 years gone now, who had blessed me and shrunk me in the same warm breath. "You'll make a lovely nurse." I did not become a nurse. I became the captain of a warship, responsible for 280 lives and $4 billion of steel and the freedom of the sea lanes that carry the goods of the world. But I have thought about her 100 times, and I have never once been angry at her, because she was not wrong about the size of my heart. She was only wrong about the size of the world's imagination, and that was never her fault to carry. I thought about the commander at my qualification board in 2007, who did not want to sign my letter and signed it anyway, because he could not find a lie to hang his refusal on. I have wondered over the years whether he ever thought about me, whether he ever saw a woman take command of a ship and remembered the lieutenant junior grade he tried and failed to break and felt anything about it. I hope he did. Not because I want him to suffer, because I want him to have learned. The learning is the only part that ever mattered. And I thought about the chief, about the fact that I had given him the second chance, and about why. It was not softness. I want to be very clear with you about that, because there are people who will hear this story and think that the gentle ending is the weak one. that the strong thing, the satisfying thing, would have been to break him on the pier and leave the pieces for the fleet to talk about. I do not believe that. I have never believed that. I gave Chief Voss a way out of the hole not because I am kind, though I try to be, and not because what he did was small, because it was not. I gave it to him because I have spent my whole life on the receiving end of other people's certainty, and I know, better than almost anyone alive, that the thing that changes a person is not the size of the punishment. It is being seen clearly, in the worst moment, by someone who has every right to look away, and being told, I see exactly what you did, and I still think you can be more than this. That is the thing that was done for me, quietly, a handful of times across 25 years, by people who could have written me off and did not. A chief who taught me the deck when a lieutenant told him not to bother. A captain who put me forward for command when the board was leaning the other way. My father, with the steel in his hands, who never said much, but who put my scholarship letter down on the table so gently, like it might tear, because he understood before anyone that his daughter was carrying something that could be lost if it was handled wrong. My father died the year before I took command. He never saw the ship. He saw the orders, though. I flew home when the orders came, before I checked aboard, and I sat with him at the same kitchen table where the scholarship letter had lain 30 years before, and I put the command orders down in front of him, and he read them slowly, the way he read everything, with the steel dust still worked into the creases of hands that no longer worked anything. He read that his daughter was to command a guided missile destroyer, and he was quiet for a long time, the way he had been quiet over the letter all those years before. And then he said the only thing he ever said about it, and he said, 280. He had read the crew number somewhere in the pages. 280 families are going to hand you their kids. And his eyes filled, and he did not wipe them, and he said, you be the one I'd have wanted when they handed them you. That was all. That was the whole benediction. It is the standard I have tried to meet every day since, and it is the reason, more than any other, that I could not leave a chief in a hole. Because somewhere Chief Voss has a family too, and a daughter, 15 years old, and I will not be the officer who decided a man was only ever going to be the worst 2 seconds of his career. I got to be a captain because a small number of people declined to do the fast wrong math on me. The least I can do, the whole of what I can do, is decline it on the people who land at my brow doing it on me. There's a cost to the declining, and I will name it because I promised you I would be honest about the toll. The cost is that you carry the correction yourself. Every time you choose the small, clean action over the loud, satisfying one, you take the heat of the moment and you hold it inside your own chest instead of throwing it back, and it does not simply vanish because you were graceful. It goes somewhere. It goes into the tiredness under the composure, the tiredness I let myself feel for 4 minutes in a cabin with the door shut and the coffee going cold. Grace is not free. It is paid for, quietly, by the person extending it out of a reserve that is not bottomless. I have watched strong people run that reserve dry and turn bitter, and I understand exactly how it happens, and I have decided, so far, one brow at a time, not to let it happen to me. But it is a decision I have to make again every time. It never becomes automatic. Anyone who tells you grace gets easy has not been extending the real kind. The ship got underway on schedule. That is the part of a Navy life that outsiders never quite understand. Whatever happens on the pier, the ship still has to sail. The tide does not care about a chief's bad morning or a captain's tired hour. 3 weeks after the Brow, USS Ridgely singled up her lines and stood out of the harbor on a bright, hard, blue morning, and I took her to sea. Chief Voss was on the forecastle for it, running the anchor detail, and he was squared away in a manner I had not seen from him before. There is squared away, that is fear. That is a man being crisp because he is afraid of the consequence of being sloppy. And there is squared away, that is pride. That is a man being crisp because he has decided to be worth his anchors. They look almost the same from a distance. Up close, they are nothing alike. He was the second kind now. It had taken 3 weeks and a great deal of quiet work on his part. In the mess and on the deck and, I suspect, in the mirror. But he was the second kind. He caught my eye once. From the forecastle to the bridge wing, a long way, and he did not smile, because you do not smile at your captain across a working ship. He came to attention, briefly, in the old way, the way that says nothing and means everything. And then he went back to his line handlers, and I went back to conning my ship out to sea. 2 months after that, I saw the thing I had asked him for come true, and I did not have to ask again. We were in port, and a new sailor reported aboard, a seaman apprentice, 18 years old, first ship, first day, and she came up the pier with a sea bag too big for her, and a look on her face that I recognized from 30 years back in a kitchen in Pennsylvania. The look of a person who has arrived somewhere enormous and is not sure the somewhere has room for them. She stopped at the foot of the brow, unsure, the way you are unsure the first time, and she did not look like anyone's idea of a warfighter, because she was a scared kid in a fresh uniform. And if the world does its fast wrong math on anyone, it does it on a scared 18-year-old who does not fit the picture. Chief Voss was on the quarterdeck. I was on the bridge wing above, where a captain can see the brow without being seen, and I watched it. He came down the brow. He did not block it. He walked down to the scared kid at the bottom with those big boatswain's mate hands open at his sides, and he said something I could not hear. And then he reached out and took the too big bag off her shoulder and carried it himself, and he walked her up the brow, slow, so she could find her feet on it. And at the top, he showed her how to face aft and salute the colors, quietly, so no one would see her not know. And then he took her to the officer of the deck and got her aboard, welcomed, squared away, home. I did not say anything to him about it. Some things you do not say because saying them makes them smaller. But I stood on that bridge wing and I watched a man carry a frightened kid's bag up a brow, and I thought, that is what the door was for. That is the whole reason you leave a person a door instead of a hole. Not so they can save themselves. So they can turn around at the next brow and become the thing that saves someone else. Lieutenant Junior Grade Reyes made lieutenant that summer on schedule, and he will command a ship of his own one day. And when he does, he will be good at it because he already knew, at 25, on a wet brow in the fog, that loyalty to a chief and loyalty to the truth are not the same thing, and that when they part ways, a real officer follows the truth. I told him so, once, in a fitness report, in the careful language those reports use. I hope he understood how much was folded into it. Boatswain's mate, second-class Danko, sounded the side for me 100 more times after that morning, at 100 more brows, and every single time, when the one MC said the ship was arriving, some small animal part of my heart stood up straight along with the pier, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude, for the thing that had held that gray morning and holds it still. And the brow, my brow, the top of my own gangway, became ordinary again. I crossed it in uniform and in civilian clothes, at dawn and at midnight, coming and going the way a captain does, and no one ever blocked it again, and no one ever put a hand on me at it again. And the ordinariness of that, the plain, unremarkable dailiness of walking up onto my own ship unimpeded, was its own kind of quiet victory, the kind you only notice if you have known the other thing. I want to talk to you now, to you specifically. The one listening who knows exactly what I am describing, because it has happened to you, in your own version at your own brow. Maybe you are not in the Navy. Maybe your brow is a conference room where they assume you are there to take notes. Maybe it is a job site where they ask to speak to someone in charge and you say you are looking at her. Maybe it is a hospital, a courtroom, a classroom, a boardroom, a garage, a lab, a farm, and someone does the fast wrong math on you, on your body, or your age, or your accent, or the shape of you, and hands you a smaller life than the one you have earned, sometimes cruelly, sometimes kindly, sometimes without even knowing they have done it. Here is what I have learned, and it is the only thing I know for certain after 25 years of piers and gates and doors. You do not owe anyone a scene to prove who you are. The urge to shout it, to brandish it, to meet their certainty with a bigger and louder certainty of your own is real, and it is human, and I have felt it at every brow of my life. But it is a trap, because the moment you make it a scene, you have agreed to fight on their ground at their size, and you have let a stranger's wrong math set the terms of your worth. Do not do it. Pick up your bag, give the small, correct order. Let the work say it. Let the record say it. Let the truth arrive on its own schedule, in its own voice, from the loudspeaker that was going to say your name, whether the man at the brow believed it or not. And when it arrives, when the pier snaps to and the color goes out of their face, and they finally see you, do not gloat. You are bigger than the moment that tried to make you small. Prove it by how gently you can hold the person who got you wrong. Because the ones who understand the pecking order best are never the ones most certain of it. They are the ones who have been at the bottom of it, wrongly, and climbed anyway, and reached the top, and turned around, and reached a hand back down. I have been shoved at my own brow, and I have carried a frightened kid's bag up someone else's. In the distance between those two mornings is the whole of what I have learned. You do not answer contempt with contempt. You answer it with the ship. You answer it with the work. You answer it, in the end, by becoming the person who makes sure the next one never has to be shoved at all. Cross your own brow, carry your own bag, let them catch up. The end.